a dogma lesson, just not bothering to plan? That's a question for TEFLologists. When I read this book, is it better to skim or scan? That's a question for TEFLologists. Can you be a good teacher if you have a CELTA? Or should you invest in an MA or a Delta? From politics to methodology, we'll discuss them all on TEFLology.
Welcome to this special interview episode of TEFLology. The three of us recently attended the JASET conference in Hiroshima. JASET stands for the Japanese Association of College English Teachers. The overall theme of the conference was fostering English communicative competence for peace and friendship. At the convention, Matthew and Rob caught up with Professor Craig Smith, who was one of the plenary speakers at the convention. The topic of Craig Smith's address was Global Peace-Building Conferences for English Language Learners. And here is the interview.
Okay, for today's episode, we have a special feature, which is an interview. We're currently at the JASET 2014 conference in Hiroshima, and we've been very lucky to have the opportunity to speak to Craig Smith. Craig Smith is founding chair of the Department of Global Affairs at Kyoto University Foreign Studies. He is advisor to the Department of Student Affairs for experiential learning projects. He has often participated in overseas curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular academic events and community engagement projects with university students. Thank you very much for joining us, Craig.
Thank you for inviting me today.
Great. And Rob is going to start the questions.
Okay, so how did you become interested in the role that language education plays in global affairs?
Well, I always felt a little frustration at how boring a lot of language lessons are. You know, lessons that have a specific pronunciation focus, or you know, a grammar focus, or a focus on the discourse structure of conversations or essays. I just thought that's not very interesting. And but I realize it's valuable.
Right.
And the interesting part of language education, I think, is in vocabulary development. So if you start to think about how students are going to improve their English language vocabulary, you need to give them texts that are rich and interesting in low-frequency vocabulary to get them out of the high school vocabulary world. So I think because I was looking for interesting texts for students, I wanted to find texts that were not for native speakers, were for a kind of global audience of people. And I started looking at United Nations organization texts and international NGOs and intergovernmental organizations as well, like ASEAN and so on. And I thought, this is good. These are texts made for the whole world, and they're on topics that are of interest to at least a region or some specific interest, like an NGO's interest in feeding kids, or a United Nations issue. So I think that's how I made the connection.
I see.
Yeah.
Right. The title of your plenary is Japanese University Students and Global Peace-Building Conferences. Can you give us an idea of what you're going to be talking about in that address?
I think we've got a problem in that so few Japanese students are going overseas in any kind of academic way. You know, they're going overseas touring, they're going overseas shopping, they're going overseas for English as a second language coursework. But I'm an English teacher. If students go overseas from our university, which is a Gaidai, University of foreign languages, really. We say foreign studies, but in Japanese it's the University of Foreign Languages. We've got students who are spending a lot of money to go to Canada or the UK or Australia to study in ESL programs with sometimes mainly other Japanese students.
Right.
But they're not going overseas in any serious academic way. There's too few of them. And a lot of the kids who are going overseas as university students went to high school for 4 years in Wales or in Sydney or Toronto. So the regular Japanese homegrown student is just not going overseas in an academic way. So there are conferences all over the world that are geared to people who have near target levels of English, and students who the students going are either very special cases. They really developed their English language proficiency to an exceptional level, or they were at high school, maybe even primary school, in Singapore because their dads were working there or their mums were working in another country. So we need to find some way to get Japanese university kids overseas in a way that doesn't just develop their English language proficiency, but lets their intelligence shine on a global stage. Or what are people going to think? Where are the Japanese kids at these conferences? So,
could you give some examples of peace-building conferences
that are available to students? Well, for example, every time there's a G7 or used to be G8, but it became G7 again, right? Russia's gone. And they always have a youth summit. So the United Nations has special youth conferences on, when Malala made her speech, whenever that was, July 18th or 17th or something in 2013?
I think so.
Not so long ago. And they had a youth conference there. There's youth conferences organized by commercial organizations in which students make business proposals. And then business people judge them. There's international speech contests. There's like in Norway, in Trondheim, there's a conference every 2 years on peace building. So there's lots of these conferences. There's lots of Model United Nations conferences all over the world. So students do have opportunities, but in my experience, going to conferences, there are very few Japanese students, and either they're the special case kids I mentioned, or they are silent. Few and quiet. That is not good.
What do you think is responsible for the decreasing numbers of Japanese students going abroad, as you've been describing?
Who want to go abroad for any purposes? Say at our university, we have more places for kids to go overseas than we have kids who want to go. So basically now, if you apply, you can get in. Why? Well, I think since 9/11, 2001, the world just seems like a more dangerous place. And I suppose there are kids who are timid and worried about going over, mothers and fathers and grandparents who think it could be a very bad idea to go overseas. And, what if we look at this morning's newspaper? It's not good, is it? The world is dangerous. When I was a university student, kids used to backpack from Australia to England. Probably every Australian kid my age lived in Earl's Court for a few years.
They're still there, a lot of them.
And they went overland, and a lot of them were just hiking and taking local buses. Anybody doing that these days would be insane. You couldn't go through Central Asia, or you couldn't go through Afghanistan like kids used to do. So the perception is in the reality. The world is more dangerous. Also, Japanese teachers generally feel that language skills are dropping, and they blame it on yutori kyoiku, too much freedom in high school education curriculum. And then, on a positive side, kids have international communication opportunities that didn't exist before. You know, on the internet, in social networking systems. You know, who needs to go overseas? Overseas is on your computer. You know, and they have these intimate conversations and relationships and friendships on the internet. And also, I wonder if the total numbers have really decreased. I'm not sure, because I've got tons of kids who, in, say, the school breaks, are joining some study tour to Cambodia, a study tour to India, or they're going by themselves to Thailand. They're going by themselves to Finland, and there are kids who are volunteering in Moldova, kids who are volunteering to teach English to children of immigrant families in Australia. They're doing all kinds of things. I wonder if kids are going overseas, but more independently. They're not going with a university group. They've found other NPOs, travel agents, or just their own social networking contacts that are providing opportunities. So I don't have the statistics on that. Do you?
Not to hand. So it's not so much the numbers of students going abroad that's changed in your opinion, but more the way that they're going abroad.
That's possible. Or the numbers have changed because of those other reasons. World is dangerous, their language skills are poor. And a lot of people, a lot of Japanese teachers complain that young people don't have the backbone that their fathers and grandparents have, that life has become a little too easy. You know, that but here we are in Hiroshima, there's been a terrible landslide. You know, every time we turn around in Japan in the last few years, people have suffered one tragedy or another, often related to natural disasters. So the hardships are still here in society. So, but people say, you know, young people aren't like they used to be.
So you think that's a self-fulfilling statement?
That's a very insightful comment. You know.
Yeah, and I think it happens also in terms of, you know, I've seen English teachers tell their students how hard English is. And that's, you know, if you start from there. Then,
that's right.
If you tell the student English is very hard, especially for Japanese people, it's a great message.
So just watch it, don't do it. It's kind of like baseball, you know, or football. It's too hard. You can only do it when you're little. When you become a teenager, leave it to the really expert people. Just watch it on television.
Exactly.
So just coming back to a little bit about maybe the practicalities of what you do in terms of promoting peace through the classroom. For example, how do you prepare your students to attend a peace-building conference?
I look at conferences that we could call peace-building, or activities that we call peace-building, just from the point of view of a language teacher, or in that I want to help them prepare speeches that they might make, come up with ideas for a written proposal, negotiation strategies when they're talking to people. I just think about it like that. And I don't sort of go heads on for peace issues. I'm a language teacher, and then I try to get students to regulate their own learning and to take ownership of their own groups. So then I'm kind of a parent. You know, I sort of create the opportunity, tell them that, you know, you can do this, you know, and it's going to be good for you. And if you run into any problems, let me know. I'll see what I can do. So I get a lot of students who are willing to do different sort of community building, community engagement, peace building conferences, just by kind of helping them get ideas, telling them that this opportunity is here, and I'll book the room so you can have meetings. I'll make copies for you. You know, I'll help you with the application to go to the thing.
Yeah.
I just do the kind of dad part, and then I want them to do it independently. And I want them to want to do it, and I want them to be independent. I want them to be strong. I want to watch what they do. I just want to observe and wait for personal growth to appear and that kind of thing. So I don't really look at it so much as a teacher. You know, I started teaching primary school, and I think for primary school teachers, I taught the 3rd and 4th year. There's so much development in kids. You get used to observing. You get very used to their parents on your case all the time. You know, so you realize these are people's children. They are expecting learning and growth. And it's going to happen for most kids if you don't interfere with it. You know, don't hit them over the knuckles with your ruler too many times and things like that. So I think I got used to letting kids learn as they will, unless you interfere with it. So
You mentioned
that's what I do.
Okay, okay, thanks. You mentioned this idea of talking about your university students, also about this idea of personal growth.
Yeah.
Do you think that is one of the responsibilities of language teachers?
Oh, absolutely. I think because first we're educators, aren't we? We're not teaching language. We're teaching people.
Right.
We're teaching students. And between the ages of 18 and 22, it's like childhood, isn't it? It's like, say, from birth to age 4 almost. There's just so much happening. So kids come into university really as kids, you know. But when they leave, some of them truly are different kinds of human beings. You know, they've got different interests, totally different maturity levels, ways of looking at the world that have evolved since first year. There's really a lot of growth in those 4 years, a lot of development. You know, so I think we have to be more than language teachers.
And is that just as important with adult students as with child students?
I think so.
Right.
I think so. Every bit as important. The only difference is we don't see their parents.
Right.
You know, they're not on the scene. And often when they're in university clubs, extracurricular activities, they're totally independent. There's no teacher mediation anymore. And parents we don't know, are they monitoring what their kids are doing or not? But these are somebody's children in our classes, and that gives us a great responsibility. Somewhere there's a mom and dad paying the tuition and probably worrying a lot and not sure of what their kids are doing because they're not getting much information. And as teachers, we have no communication with the parents. That's kind of sad, but it gives us a responsibility, I think, to watch and make sure that somebody else's kids who are in our classes are doing okay. You know.
Do you think there's enough? So I think maybe many teachers would respond to this idea that, you know, I'm just a language teacher. You often hear that, or maybe taking that a little bit further, that they've never been trained to help students develop.
Right.
You know, personally, not just not just in their language abilities. Do you think that should be a feature of teacher training?
Are we talking about university level? Most university teachers have no training whatsoever, and they were just good students who went to graduate school and then got a job at a university. They don't know much about any sorts of teaching methodology, histories. They don't know much about the options. They were just good learners. and they liked learning, and somehow they became a teacher. So, yeah, I think that when I was lucky in my teacher education because in my university I went to the Teachers College for a year, and I was only there a few days when they sent us out for teaching practice for a week. And we were suddenly observing lessons, and we had to teach a few lessons in the week. We hadn't even taken any courses yet. We just had the orientation, buying our textbooks, and boom, they sent us out. And we were out for 6 weeks. And then we had options to spend more time out in school. So I think what we miss out on is looking at other people's classes. So nobody ever, I team teach with a guy, and but nobody else has ever come to look at my classes. So, and I don't go to anybody else's class. You know, and when the guy I teach with, Makoto Kurata, and I started, he would teach and I would sit at the back of the room, and then we'd switch, and I'd come up to the front and he'd sit at the back of the room. And I started falling asleep when he was teaching. And shock of shocks, I saw him falling asleep while I was teaching. So we started teaching together. But we don't really work very well together, do we? So at schools, we're all in these little compartments with closed doors, and we go to teachers' meetings and tell lies about how well things are going, but we don't really do things together. That's a shame, I think. So a great part of teachers' education could be, like now, if I came to one of your classes, I could probably get new ideas, new inspiration, motivate myself, and it would be the simplest, cheapest way of educating ourselves to be better teachers. But we don't do it. Isn't that weird?
It's strange. Just talking about the peace-building conferences on campus, how long have you been doing those for?
Well, I'm involved in several different ways with peace-building conferences. One is the Model United Nations. And I've been involved for quite a few years with Model United Nations, but a few years ago we started realizing at international conferences there's very few Japanese students, and they sure are quiet, and there's an all-Japan, bless their hearts, an all-Japan Model United Nations held every year, started by Mrs. Ogata in Tokyo. There's an all-Kansai, but it's held, I might be wrong about this, but I believe it's held mostly in Japanese and with very few international students. So with a couple of my colleagues, Todd Thorpe from Kinki University and Lori Zenik Nishide from Kobe Gaidai, we started an all-English Model United Nations. And it's worked. We had our 5th one this year. And Todd and Lori were doing this at Nishiko High School. And for high school students, it's compulsory, but for university students, it's completely their own choice. So you've got to get students willing to give up their own time, to spend some money, to do all the hard preparation, and then engage in this English-only exercise for 3 days. And why is it peace building? Because since it's a Model United Nations, we choose United Nations related topics. For example, this year was the Secretary General's Global Education First Initiative. We had a conference on water issues. We had one on children's rights. So in that sense, it becomes peace building because it's part of the United Nations. But the United Nations has 193 members. Some of the countries are run by dictators. Some of the countries are very, very conservative. Some of the countries are rather liberal. So this is an engagement for the students in critical thinking. There's a wide range of national opinions on any one issue, plus there's conflicting reports on what is actually happening on any one issue in any one part of the world. So we're not teaching peace. We are letting the students engage in analytical thinking, and they have to try to represent the countries, but they still have their own thoughts and their own feelings, which could lead them to think, I am representing a despicable government, or I am representing an admirable government. I wish my own country's government had some of these features. So it's only peace building in the sense that probably a reason we become teachers is we hope we'll help make the world a better place. You know, that's what's exciting about being a teacher. So they're peace building in the sense that probably as teachers we're all inherently optimistic that things could be better than they are. And if we could just be better thinkers, we might not want to make life miserable for so many other people. And so in that sense, the Model United Nations Conference is peace building. And then, you know, with Kip Cates started another one. Kip Cates is one of the speakers here this weekend, main speaker. And he started the Asia Youth Forum. And we bring together students from Asian countries, and they, without the UN format, without all the rules and their procedures, they have cultural exchange. They talk about issues that involve their part of the world. And then I've created some conferences from zero. I took some students to a Philippine university that has a Department of Peace Studies, and we talked about poverty reduction initiatives. So it's a fun thing to do with students.
And what changes have you seen in your students since starting these programs?
There's risk that you take on board because some students may not like it at all. Some students may be sidetracked and just miss some of the opportunities that are there. But for some students, it is they find learning points that become turning points in their lives. They find learning points that start them down a different path. They have ambitions that they didn't have before. They see themselves with a different potential. They see other people with respect that they didn't have before. They see life as a little more complex. That it's very easy to criticize, say, a situation in another country when you haven't met the people before and haven't actually researched the issues. So kids, the university students, learn something in an experiential, sort of personal way that they couldn't get inside a classroom from a textbook, unless they have great powers of imagination. So, you know, some kids read Charles Dickens and, wow, it's alive for them. It's the characters are alive. This isn't paper. They've got the scenes in their minds. They don't need the movies or the stage play. They've got it. But for a lot of kids, paper is dead. They need something that's a little more immediate and personal and real to imagine what's really going on. So the conferences bring people together discussing important issues, and we can get kids excited at a conference like I can never do in my classes. My classes are so boring and sterile compared to what happens at the conferences. The conferences are like the front third of my classes. Everybody at the front is paying attention. We have a task. They're all involved. The people at the back of the room are on their smartphones. You know, they're looking at line. They've gone to the toilet 4 times. My class is only 30 minutes old. What's going on here? But the conference is like the front third. People are engaged, you know. And when you can get young people engaged in educational activities, it's wonderful just to watch, but it's wonderful for them to be engaged. Because, you know, when we hit high school, we stop doing a lot of things. Everybody gives up the piano because Chopin is way too hard. Kids in Canada who were playing ice hockey from the age of 4 now stop because the only teams are for kids who might make it as a pro or play on there's only 40 kids in a high school of 1,000 who are going to be on the high school ice hockey team. We disengage a lot of kids. A lot of kids at high school become observers. They're in the stands applauding the teams, you know. And the same thing happens in classrooms. You know, they think I am not one of the smart kids, you know. You know, they're going on to great things. I'm just getting my gentleman C here, just surviving. I hope I get a job. God, nobody's going to marry me. Oh, no. So we turn most of the school into observers instead of participants. This is terrible. So conferences, we're trying to structure the conference as teachers to make everybody a participant. You know, we don't want to do the conferences for the elite 10% or 15%. We want it for everybody.
Yeah. See. And so maybe one final question. What message would you like people to take away from your plenary speech? What would be your main message?
The plenary on the peace building conferences.
Yes.
That we are teaching in Japan. This is the Japan Association of College English Teachers Convention. And we have to do more to get our students involved in international conferences that might lead to a more peaceful world. You know, there's a Global Peace Index that's been published every year for about 7 years. It's produced by the Institute for Economics and Peace. I think it started in Australia. They compare 193 countries in the world. They did this year. 2014, Japan ranks 8th on 23 criteria for peacefulness of 163 countries.
Right.
Okay. I think Canada might have been 6th this year. So, but in the top 10 countries on these 23 criteria in 3 categories, it's very interesting to look for. Global Peace Index, they have a good website. But of the top 10 countries, Japan is the only country that's in Asia. Japan is the only country with a large population. Okay, the next biggest is Canada with about a quarter of Japan's population.
Right.
Number 1 is Iceland with somewhat a larger population than the attendance at this conference. But they've got like 230,000 people. This is like a Philippine family. You know, if you go into the cousins generation and a few, you know, you go back a little bit, and 230,000 people is not a lot. The other countries are like 4 million, 5 million, 9 million. So what is it about Japan that results in peacefulness, at least in this index? You know, what is it? And is it that Japanese students can't speak English? Is it that Japanese students don't want to go overseas? I hope that's not the reason that creates peacefulness. I think if Japan is peaceful, Japan hasn't killed anybody in battle in 70 years. No Japanese person has died in a battle in 70 years. If our students are lucky, by the time they're 50, Japan will have a century of peace. Isn't it worth helping Japanese students have a voice in global forum? You know, isn't it worth getting them out there? If there's something good about this country, then why are not Japanese students out there at peace-building conferences? Let's help them as language teachers get on those global stages.
Great, thank you very much. I think we're going to stop there, if that's okay. Thank you again to Professor Craig Smith for your engaging and inspiring answers. We appreciate it.
Did I talk too much?
No, not at all. That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for listening to this special interview episode of TEFLology. We will return with our usual format next week. We'd like to thank Professor Craig Smith for giving his time over to be interviewed by us. I'd also like to mention that the Model United Nations that were talked about in the interview, the link to that can be found in the description section of this podcast if you'd like more information. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.